When real men can't sleep, real men do the news. So here I am, insomniac, ever vigilant, indefatigable, doing the news. And this one is interesting to me. Rather, beyond interesting, actually fascinating. Because between the two, they were floating at one point to get rid of Joe Biden, if you remember. And they were using Cuomo, a guy who got 20,000 New Yorkers, I think 30,000 New Yorkers killed. But they thought, okay, this is our guy. Bloomberg at one point wanted to jump into the race. Everybody in that race was looking to stop Sanders. And if Sanders would have made it through and didn't necessarily get the votes, they would have tried to rip it from his hands from the convention, allowing the party to basically go up in flames. The Republicans, though, weren't doing this. I mean, 60%, over 60% of the people who are voting for Joe Biden are doing so and only to get rid of Trump, meaning Joe Biden is a placeholder for those individuals who are just, I just need to get Trump out. But Trump was getting like 70% support of people who were voting for him. And so you can see the vast disparity there in the number of people who are enthusiastic about one candidate, but enthusiastic with an affirmative case for that candidate, as opposed to enthusiastic with the notion of just trying to hold back what they consider to be the night and willing to put anybody in that office, even if it was a ham sandwich, in order to get Donald Trump out. Ham sandwich, you got good advisors. Ham sandwich will do great. They're now asking this about Trump, though. There have been some disastrous new polling for Donald Trump. And because the polling has gotten so bad, so horrendous, so hideous, so preposterously obscene in regards to how bad it is if you are a Republican looking at Trump trying to win this election, that Republicans, establishment Republican leadership, has started asking whether or not they need to replace Donald Trump, whether or not it would be better for somebody else to be running in that spot. Because Donald Trump seems like he is uniquely suited to be a one-term president, especially with everything else going. It's not to say it's a foregone conclusion, but it is to say as each week passes and the polling gets worse and the conditions on the ground get worse and the government inability to deal with those conditions on the ground gets that much more discredit. His polling suffers. I would make the also basic point that this election is different from when Hillary Clinton was running. There was no standard by which to place Donald Trump up against. People wanted change, and so Donald Trump was changed. They were willing to accept even that if it gets them and shakes up the system in some kind of way. Well, they got their system shaken up. Some of it was optics. Some of it was a perpetuation of Obama. But ultimately, his mannerisms is so over the top grotesque that it's repulsive. Now, if you could show material benefits, then people could get over the personality being horrendous and they could still put you back in that office if they think, okay, well, he's horrendous, but there's economic benefits and so forth. Yes. The problem here is there are 128,000 people dead. Probably 120,000, maybe even 130,000 by tomorrow. You have over 2.8 million people infected with COVID-19. And this was after having 3 months notice of that it was coming here and knowing how severe it was going to be just based on the intelligence reports and our feedback coming from the World Health Organization, from people we had in the World Health Organization. My point is, all of these things are making it that much more treacherous for him to run. None of these things were present in Hillary Clinton's situation. Also, the Black Lives Matter protests. Again, it's making it treacherous for him to run. It's creating a context of terrain that is just not good terrain for Donald Trump. Different from the last race, where all of the polling was showing Clinton winning and then all of a sudden it showed Trump winning in the end. There's a difference. In this race, Trump is in office. It's one thing to have a general idea, conception of what Trump may be, and in which case you may vote for Trump, thinking that he's going to be X or Y, and you can kind of shape your idea of him around it. You may even consider you don't believe that stuff. You may even say to yourself, I want to shake up the system. And Donald Trump, as crazy as it is, people are going to contain him. Whatever that is, whatever you want to look at Donald Trump as a hacksaw against a system that you consider to be grotesquely unfair, whatever it is, Clinton, who was uniquely disliked, was running against a candidate who they had no conception in regards to the way he was governing. They just thought he was incompetent, but how bad could he be? This is different. This is different. Welcome to the Soapbox. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. If you guys dig this content, like, share, subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal, Patreon, or Super Chats. I don't have an expectation of people being up late tonight, so most people can catch the video in the morning. But I definitely have 1, 2, maybe 3 videos that I want to go over before I turn in for the night. This is one of them. To them to get to the point of replacing or wanting to replace Trump. And just so you know what I'm talking about, Fox News was having this conversation on their channel. GOP operatives, for the first time, are raising the possibility of replacing Trump, or that Trump could jump out the race if poll numbers don't rebound. Over the weekend, I spoke to sample major players. One described Trump's psyche as fragile. Not convinced yet. He's got time. He's running against an opponent who is literally hiding in his basement. Plus, public isn't focusing on left wing Joe Biden has become, so much so that he can't bring himself to denounce rioting. Joe Biden is not left wing, and if you're making that argument, you're insane. They said the speculation indicates how tense GOP operatives are about Trump losing and the party, the Senate, and having their entire agenda abolished as a leftist wave election. Again, lots of time. Trump has endured a horrible campaign for months. Now, a wave election is an interesting thing. Joe Biden is not left-wing. And this may be a wave election, but not wave an election in the sense of getting anything accomplished, just wave in a section of getting Trump out. One of the things they made a point of, Senate, they're terrified of losing it. The House, they've already lost it. And if they lose the presidency to Joe Biden, they will probably also lose the Senate. Meaning whoever wins the presidency will most likely hold and retain the Senate, the party. So if Biden takes it, Trump will probably lose the Senate, which means the House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, presidency, House of Representatives, and the Senate will all at this point be in Democrats' hands. But this is not a wave in the sense that these guys are going to get anything major accomplished, at least not that I'm aware of. Biden has not necessarily supported any kind of major legislation. And this notion of pushing him, when you have no clout in this, because the majority of the people are voting for him, not because of what he's going to do, but because of who he is not. There's a difference in those things. He's getting into office, running from his basement, promising nothing, offering, in real terms, nothing. And because he's got elected offering nothing, he's going to govern as such. Just saying. But Fox News, Fox is talking about this. Now, right here, let's go into why Republicans are saying he may drop out and that his psyche is fragile. Texas, Joe Biden up 1. Texas, Joe Biden up 1. And you could step into the polling for the moment. If the election was held today, who would you choose? Joe Biden gets 45%. Trump gets 44%. Now, when you go into the dynamics, you have Hispanics voting for Joe Biden, 62-25. Non-white, 69-19. Blacks, 85-6. Now, I would have thought that number would have been higher for Trump, for Joe Biden, actually. So this 6 is an interesting number to me. Now, if you look at who was voting, also in its sense of age, Biden is getting the millennials, and that's it. 45 and up go to Trump. Baby boomers go to Trump. Gen X goes to Trump. Millennials, 58%. Never tell me that your vote doesn't matter, kids. It's obvious in the polling. You are the only group voting for Joe Biden in these numbers, 58 to 29. And because you're the group that's voting and that level of numbers or that level of support, you basically tilted this race by 1 point in a red state. I'm just telling you why they're freaked out. Let's keep going. It's not that polls are perfect. It's just when you see a cacophony of them that is showing you the exact same thing, you better believe it. The economy, Trump, 51-37. They believe Trump is better for the economy. Coronavirus, Biden, 44-41. Now, if you look at skew on this one also, you get millennials voting for Biden 2-1. Everything else is Trump. Gen X tied. But baby boomers 51 and 45 and up 49 to 41 Trump. Race relations 47-37 Biden. Immigration 42-46 Trump. Now that's interesting, right? Who do you think is better on immigration? And the majority says Trump by 4. I know lefties have this idea of the public, but the public doesn't agree with you entirely on immigration. It depends on where you are, of course, but... All right, so I want to go to this one. Real clear politics. Now, if you look at the spread, general election, Biden is winning all of these. Every poll that has come out has shown Biden with a massive lead. You can even dip into the various states. Look at this. Florida, Biden, ahead in every poll leading up to this particular moment. Michigan, another battleground state, Biden. Pennsylvania, Biden. North Carolina, Trump gets one of those. Again, that is disastrous. Now, if this was kind of like in 2016 where there was nothing else going on and it was just Trump versus Clinton or Trump versus Biden, I would probably say Donald Trump probably would win that race. But the problem is all of this race is happening within a context that just wasn't there in 2016. This gets more interesting when you get into the numbers on some of the polling, not just the polling itself, but the inside numbers also in secondary topics. New York Times Siena poll, 50-36. This one is the CNBC All Survey poll. Look at this one. In June, 47-38, a lead by 9 points. In April, it was 44-39. So Trump has gone down 1 and Biden has gone up 3. I'm just showing you. And if you look at the issues, Trump wins on the economy, but loses on every other issue in this particular poll. But this poll is not dramatically different than the other ones that I've just shown you, meaning they're giving you a similar set regardless of who's doing the polling. Here's the other one. This one is Rasmussen. Rasmussen is usually the last bastion of Republican safety. Look at this. Trump's approval in June, 17. Oh, here we are. 55 disapprove, 42 totally approve. He's underwater. He's underwater. And you can see that number get progressively worse. 47, 46, 45, 44, 42. Is it impossible for him to turn it around? No. But that looks bad. The context of all of that looks bad. And again, the point that I'm making is this is not happening in a cycle where nothing is going on. The polling is bad for reasons associated with Donald Trump's actions and behaviors in that office, especially dealing with the most recent crisis. He was ill prepared to protect this country. More importantly, out of sync with the country's ideas. Take a listen to this. This is what I mean when I say happening within the context. Over the last 2 weeks, support for Black Lives Matter increases nearly as much as it has over the previous 2 years, according to data for Civics, an online survey firm. By a 28-point margin, Civics find that the majority of Americans support the movement. Now, this gets more interesting. Monmouth University poll found that 76% of Americans consider racism and discrimination a big problem, up 26 points from 2015. The poll also finds that 57% of voters thought the anger behind the demonstrations was fully justified. Again, 21 points. Call it somewhat justified. Polls show a majority was fully, I might have said that wrong. 57% of voters thought the anger behind the demonstration was fully justified. 21% thought they were somewhat justified. That's amazing, right? I mean, you're talking about like 80%. Polls show that the majority of Americans believe that the police were more likely to use deadly force against African Americans and that there is a lot of discrimination against Black Americans in society. Back in 2013, before Black Lives Matter began, voters disagreed on all of these. So across the board, Black Lives Matter, police attacking blacks or dispensing justice, quote unquote, more vigorously on people of color. None of those things were things that the public agreed with. Now, the public has shifted dramatically in a very short period of time and is reconciling these issues of race all at once. Even though it's not necessarily getting to the heart of class yet, it's at the very least grappling with the optics. Here's another thing, and I think it's more than optics, actually. I think it gets into the heart of this notion of wanting to grapple and deal with some racial inequalities in your society. But again, the problem with that is you have to deal with the financial costs, the economic costs, or the deviation and skew in regards to getting labor for free, basically, and the United States government putting in laws to allow such, and having that ride its momentum out going all the way into like the 90s and 2000s. So that has to be grappled with in real terms. And right now, the only thing that they're talking about is basically focusing entirely on the cops, something I said the Democrats were going to do with this movement. Here's the other part. A Kaiser Foundation poll found Thursday that 64% of Americans supported the recent protests against police, including 86% of Democrats, 67% of independents, and 36% of Republicans. Support for protesters seen across racial lines with 84% of blacks, 64% of Hispanics, and 61% of whites in support. Across the board, they all support it. Across the board. Here's the other one. According to Quinnipiac poll, a clear majority of 55% thinks the protests will lead to meaningful reform. That includes 76% of Democrats, 52% of independents, and 34% of Republicans. More than 9 in 10 support requiring the police to intervene to stop excessive force by other officers. 89% requires supports giving a verbal warning while shooting. Another 76% requires state to publicly release disparity records or disciplinary records for cops. And 74% allowing individuals to sue police officers if they were subjected to excessive force. Around 2/3 support banning chokehold, and 52% support banning no-knock warrants. Donald Trump is against all of that. Donald Trump is against all of that. And more to the point of being against all of that, he is out of sync with what the public is saying in regards to issues of race, especially with the public flipping almost within a couple of weeks with the murder of Floyd and the protests, and with the issue of COVID-19. He's failing on both. Now, because he's failing on both, what does the public to do in that situation? What is the public to do? Meaning, if you have a sea change in the way that you've seen your racial politics, And if you have to look at the COVID-19 thing and you think it is abominable that all of those people died from that virus and that Trump is uniquely responsible because of his actions, keep in mind the majority of the public wanted Trump to get rid of the virus first before pushing him to go back to work. Trump ignored that and functioned in the interest of the 1%. The public wanted Trump to attend to the needs of the population. Trump ignored that and attended to the needs of the 1%. Down the line, he looted the treasury when the public was in pain and needing support. And now add that to the protests. This is kind of what I'm getting at. The disgust over Trump and the changes in the polling are not distinct from one another. They're interrelated. This is not like in 2016 where you had these kind of untethered polls and Donald Trump, regardless of what happened, was always lining up with Hillary close in all of these matches, only to get to the final race and bam, you know, nothing that Donald Trump did lost him points in real terms. This is losing him points. He is the president of the United States. He is uniquely responsible for all of these things, including economics. And the public, while it gives them a pass on the economic front, because they consider the COVID-19 thing is the thing that shut down the economy, on COVID-19 itself and handling it, and the protests, they do not. So Trump has time to fix this, I suppose. And if you go into the elections, it's possible that if Trump decimates Biden in the elections, this stuff might get forgotten. Especially if you're going directly and there's a gulf between those debates. That's the last thing that rings in people's ear going into the election. Yeah, if Joe Biden passes out during the debate, shits himself during the debate, or dies during the debate, Trump will walk away with it. Now, the notion of replacing Trump, I think that's lunacy. This is just a trial balloon. They're saying this not because this is something that they have a pathway to doing, but they're dropping this up there to see what people say. Are people going to be okay with it? Are people going to be against it? How much is the backlash for it? What can we slide into it? Let's put this in people's mind right now. Maybe we can get them to change their mind and get rid of him because he's going to be an electoral disaster. And to make this that much more plain in regards to how bad this is and how these guys have been regarding it, Donald Trump knows that he's losing. He knows it. Meaning he's not blind himself. He's fully cognizant of everything that I just showed you. And he has his own internal polling to back up this reality. So I understand if some people think, yeah, this is kind of like 2016. Trump doesn't think that. The Republicans don't think that. They are thinking this is a disaster. Right here. The president has privately come to the grim realization in recent days, multiple people close to him told Politico, amid a mountain of bad polling and warnings from some of his staunchest allies, that he is on course to be a one-term president. This is from Nunberg, a supporter of Trump, by the way. So he has made the point of saying, under the current trajectory, President Trump is on the precipice of one of the worst electoral defeats in modern political elections, and worse historically for an incumbent president, said former Trump political advisor Sam Nunberg, who remains a supporter of Donald Trump. Nunberg pointed to the national polls released by CNBC and New York Times Siena over the past few weeks, showing Trump receiving below 40% support against Biden. He also gives this damning warning. If Trump numbers erode to 35% points over the next 2 weeks, he is going to be facing realistically a 400 electoral vote loss, and the president will need to strongly reconsider whether he wants to continue to run as a Republican nominee. He's a Trump supporter, and he's bringing up maybe Trump doesn't want to continue if Trump's polling get to the point of being below 35%, because that would be a disaster. They're not buying this notion that this is just like 2016. I don't buy this notion that this is like 2016. Joe Biden has his own internal polling. He can stay in the basement. And this is, by the way, taking place with him being a non-factor in this. Joe Biden is a non-factor in this race. All of this is just based on Trump and his handling of these particular crises and his inability to deal with these things in a competent, rational way. Joe Biden is just reaping the benefits of that, which is evidence of 60% of people saying they're voting for Joe Biden to get rid of Trump. I'm just saying, it has nothing to do with Trump in this case. Trump is almost like an afterthought. Fist of Dissent, Night Owls. Fork, yeah, that's right. Fist of Dissent. Brent McKinney, just shoot them in the leg, might just win. I know, right? That's kind of what I'm getting at. A ham sandwich would be 50 points ahead of Donald Trump in this race. But because it's Joe Biden, you've had a lot of independents that were not going to vote for Trump, but by the same token, weren't going to vote for Joe Biden either. They just call themselves undecided. So you will get that group of people who just don't and can't bring themselves to vote for Joe Biden. One of them. To me, you have to win my vote. And it's not enough. You're a flagrant liar. On top of being a flagrant liar, you are lying about civil rights, which to me is just gets to the nub of the type of person Joe Biden is. Beyond that point, beyond the flagrant lying in and of itself, you also have the situation where because you're a flagrant liar, because you were part of the system that created the criminal justice system to which Floyd was murdered in and all of these other people were murdered in, because you were that guy who was bragging about putting people on death row, or for that matter, a balanced budget amendment that would have adversely affected the people of this particular community. Because you are that guy, I have no trust in you to do anything in that office. Not to mention you are hitting Donald Trump from the right on issues of foreign policy. No, if you want my vote, as a bare minimum, I have to believe that there is some belief that what the public wants, that the political establishment should deliver. And with 88% of the public supporting Medicare for all, with 70% of the entire public supporting Medicare for all, 88% of Democrats, in the middle of a pandemic with 30 million people that lost their health insurance, and with Obamacare under threat right now, which would invalidate another 30 million out of health insurance. And you can't even bring yourself to support Medicare for all. If you can't do that, you don't get my vote. I said that early on. Like, share, subscribe. What Joe Biden and the Democratic Party needs to explain is why are they so ideologically rigid that a policy with 88% or 80% of Democratic support, 88% of Democratic support, they blow off. Even if that means unifying the party organically to beat Trump, they don't care. That's what they need to answer. How do you have a policy with 88% support that would unify the party and increase your chances of beating Donald Trump, a man who you call the walking apocalypse? How do you justify that? And if this many people want it in the political space and even outside of the party context of being Democrats, how do you deny that? How do you deny that? And if you will deny something like that, that means you're just completely and utterly unresponsive to the political system that we have. And that in and of itself is a problem that needs to be dealt with. And voting for the party that basically is allowing that process to continue, 66% against, 60% just against Trump. There's not an affirmative case to be made for Joe Biden. And because there's not an affirmative case to be made, he knows that he's not getting into office because of an affirmative case, so he stays in his basement. What you need to reconcile with is that what you want in a politician? And should there be more to his job than basically, I'm a placeholder? Should you not want more? Should you not expect more from that job of being, I'm just a placeholder? And what does that mean going forward when you get Tom Cotton or Ted Cruz and any Democrat again fits the man where you got to vote for any Democrat because we got to stop Ted Cruz? You understand this is an unsustainable course over the course of time that has taken place for the last 40 years. At some point, that needs to stop. Your plight is only getting worse as your political propaganda characters get worse. You've accepted the mantra of you have nowhere else to go and blue no matter who. While Democrats took all the money in the world, went all the way to the right, and by giving you that argument of blue no matter who and you have nowhere else to go, to soothe you into this kind of assuaging, rational pragmatic, narrow focus observation of the race. That when you look at this stuff over time, it becomes not pragmatic at all. It becomes utterly disastrous. And it gets worse and worse and worse as your system moves further and further to the right, making the Republican case that much more horrendous, forcing that much more of a perspective of whoever, just get him out of office, just get him out of office, just stop him. There's no point at which you get your policies with this. And lumping in and supporting a policy or party that has no interest in giving you your policy, just like the other party has no interest in giving you your policy, you need to strongly question what you are doing and whether or not you want to get your objectives accomplished or not. And whether or not trying to get those objectives accomplished can take place in a party that in no way believes in those objectives. And what do you need to do in order to try to get what you want expoused upon the world? What I would tell you is that those people in the streets have the right idea. They need to yank themselves out of the political process and realize that the political process has failed you. These guys have catered to the rich while screwing you over in an unacknowledged class war that has taken place for the last 40 years. If it wasn't for Sanders bringing up economics, they would have never brought this up in real terms. Because they're paid by the same people who would prefer that this class war remains unacknowledged so they can continue to pursue expropriation of wealth. I'll end this here. The blue no matter who nonsense has gotten us into this predicament in and of itself. I mean, you understand that the major group that doesn't vote, people of color, and people who make under $30,000 a year, both of which would typically be Democratic constituencies, both constituencies basically pulled out of the political process when they realized that the energy that they put into it was not sent back in regards to real, tangible gains. And they got cynical and left. We've did this to ourselves. You want to know why Nancy Pelosi and those other Democrats are ineffectual? Blue no matter who. You didn't put them in for an affirmative case. You put them in order to stop the Republicans. Do you know why Joe Biden, even in this moment, with 40 million people who are filed for unemployment, 30 million or so without health insurance, Obamacare being under threat of being invalidated in total, and for that matter, an eviction apocalypse coming up next month? Do you understand why Joe Biden is so ineffectual and weak in regarding this moment? Part and parcel to that is blue no matter who. The moment you accept this notion that it doesn't matter who the Democrat is, I'm just voting to keep the Republican out, you've lost all accountability in your political process because you're not making a vote for somebody. You're making a vote entirely against, with this notion of a race to the bottom. There's no enthusiasm in Joe Biden's campaign. He is considered just the default candidate. Joe Biden knows, however, that this gimmick, this scam, has basically allowed the situation where it doesn't matter how bad he is. He just needs to project himself as bland, at least worse, and a callback to a time where the politicians were better at lying about atrocious policies. This is where we are. Like, share, and subscribe. I see you in a moment, guys.